The morning I heard my daughter's fiancé say, "Once we're in Calgary, she'll stop second-guessing everything," I nearly dropped a full carafe of dark roast across the Heritage Oak counter. He was standing 20 feet away in the sitting room of the Millbrook Inn, phone pressed to his ear, facing the window that looked out over Lake Ontario. January light cut flat through the frost on the glass. He didn't turn around. Why would he? I was just the man behind the front desk, the fellow in the reading glasses and the navy cardigan, part of the furniture. That moment changed things considerably. My name is Lloyd Ambrose. I'm 63 years old, and I've lived most of my adult life in the Ottawa Valley. For 34 years, I worked as a project coordinator with the federal government, infrastructure funding, grant assessments, the kind of paperwork that keeps bridges standing and nobody ever notices. Useful work, quiet work, the kind where you show up, do it properly, and go home. I retired 18 months ago. My wife Ruth and I had talked about it for years. Travel, mornings without alarm clocks, time to breathe. What we hadn't accounted for was how loud the silence gets. Ruth took a position as a reading specialist with the Limestone District School Board in Kingston, a contract she'd always wanted and never had the timing for. So we sold our house in Canada, bought a place in the Sydenham neighborhood near the waterfront, and I found myself at 62 with no commute, no files, and absolutely nothing urgent to do. After 3 months of reading the Globe and Mail cover to cover, reorganizing my workshop, and developing strong opinions about the various Tim Hortons within cycling distance, Ruth told me gently, but firmly, that I needed to get out of the house. That's how I ended up at the Millbrook Inn. It's a small property on King Street. 12 rooms, a dining room that seats 40, a sitting area that draws mostly business travelers, and the occasional wedding party. The owner, a woman named Audrey, who'd run it for 20 years, needed a part-time front desk manager who was dependable, didn't need much supervision, and could handle the booking software without calling her every afternoon. I fit the description. 3 mornings a week, the occasional weekend shift if she had an event. It gave me somewhere to be. My daughter Leanne had followed us to Kingston. She'd been working as an emergency room nurse at Kingston General for 4 years by then, and when we mentioned the move, she said she was glad. We'd always been close. After her mother and I separated when she was 12, and Ruth came into our lives when Leanne was 16, the 4 of us had found our way to something solid. Not without effort, but solid. Solid. She'd been engaged for 8 months when I started at the Millbrook. Her fiancé worked in management consulting. He lived in Toronto during the week and drove up on weekends. They'd been together 2.5 years. I'd seen exactly one photo of him, a Christmas picture from 2 winters back, the 2 of them in ski gear somewhere north of Barrie. He looked like half the men you'd see in a Bay Street boardroom. Dark jacket, good watch, a confident smile that had clearly been useful to him. We'd never formally met. He'd canceled 2 planned dinners, once for a client commitment, once for a flight delay, and Leanne kept apologizing on his behalf with the particular weariness of someone who'd made the same apology more than twice. I didn't press. You don't press at that stage. You wait. The first time he checked into the Millbrook, I had no reason to think anything of it. He'd booked under his company's account. His reservation note said single occupancy, business, purpose, 2 nights. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early January carrying a leather briefcase and a garment bag, acknowledged me with the nod you give a parking attendant, and asked about the Wi-Fi password and whether the dining room could accommodate a client dinner for 4. I gave him the information. He was already typing on his phone. He came back the following week, and the week after. He was never rude, not exactly. More like someone who had categorized the people around him by their usefulness and filed me accordingly. I noticed the watch, the quality of the suit, the way he ordered from the dining room menu like someone mentally correcting the chef's choices. I noticed, but I didn't yet know. The 3rd week, he walked through the front door already on the phone. I was sorting reservation confirmations behind the desk. He moved past without acknowledgement, and settled into the sitting room armchair nearest the window, completely relaxed, using the space like it belonged to him. "Don't worry about her reaction," he said. "Once we're in Calgary, she'll stop second-guessing everything." I looked up. He was still facing the window, left hand in his trouser pocket. Maybe I'd misheard. I went back to the confirmation stack. "She's too attached to Kingston right now. Her job, her schedule, her whole circle. All of it." I set down the papers. "The further she gets from all that, the clearer things will get for her." I felt something shift. Not alarm, not yet. Something quieter. The particular stillness that comes before you understand that something is going to matter. He finished the call and went upstairs. I stood behind the desk for a long moment, looking at nothing. It took me 2 more weeks to know who he was. It was a Wednesday morning. Leanne stopped by before her afternoon shift. She sometimes did, brought coffee, stayed 20 minutes. That day she mentioned she'd finally persuaded her fiancé to commit to a proper dinner with us in February. "He's blocked it off," she said. "No canceling this time." Then she said his name. I looked down at the reservation screen. The name on the corporate account. Garrett Lowry. I kept my expression still. We talked about dinner plans. She finished her coffee and went to work. When she left, I sat in the desk chair and stayed there for a long moment, staring at the screen. He had been sitting 20 feet from me for 3 weeks, talking on the phone about his life, about my daughter, and he'd never looked twice. To be fair, there were reasons. My beard was new. I'd grown it during a health scare the previous spring, and Ruth told me it suited me, so it stayed. I wore reading glasses now, thick-framed ones that changed my face considerably. I'd lost 38 pounds between April and October, enough that Leanne herself had said I looked like a different person when she first saw me. And Garrett had only ever seen that one ski slope photo, 2 years old, a heavier man without the beard or the glasses. More than that, I think he genuinely didn't notice me. Not because he was young or distracted. Because people who work service jobs are, to a certain type of person, simply not worth tracking. I told Ruth that evening. We were in the kitchen, CBC radio, on low in the background. She put her fork down. "He's staying at your hotel?" "The inn, yes." "And he doesn't recognize you?" "Not even slightly." She was quiet a moment. Then she laughed, the kind of laugh that's mostly disbelief. "Lloyd." "I know." She picked her fork up, set it down again. "What did he say exactly?" I told her. The Calgary comment. The part about her getting clearer once she was further away. Ruth listened the way she listens to everything, completely, without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You think he's planning to move them there?" Leanne has never mentioned Calgary. We left it there, for a while. But I started paying attention. The following Tuesday, Garrett was back. I watched without watching. The way you learn when you work a front desk long enough. He spent a lot of time on his phone. One call, mid-morning, carried across the quiet sitting room. "The Calgary offer is finalized. I signed yesterday." I kept my eyes on the computer screen. "Leanne doesn't know yet. I'll tell her after the wedding when things settle down." After the wedding. Not before, after. That evening I asked Leanne, carefully, whether she and her fiancé had talked at all about the future, long-term plans, geography, that sort of thing. She gave me a curious look. "We're staying in Kingston, obviously. My whole career is here." I nodded, said nothing more. That night I lay awake a long time. Ruth, without opening her eyes, said, "I know you're thinking." "I know. Don't do anything yet." Over the next few weeks, pieces accumulated, not through any deliberate effort. Garrett simply spoke on the phone with no awareness that anyone in range might matter. He talked about Calgary neighborhoods, property prices on the southwest side, the commute to the office tower on 9th Avenue. He talked about Leanne's nursing career, the way someone might discuss a phase she hadn't quite grown out of. "She'll want to take some time after the move," he told whoever was on the other end. "Get settled, make new friends. She won't have the same attachment to a hospital she doesn't know. A pause. I know her. She'll adapt. I knew her too. I'd known her since she was 4 days old. She had been a nurse for 8 years, emergency medicine for 4. She came home after long shifts with the particular tiredness of someone doing work that cost them something real, and she kept going back. She didn't talk much about the hard shifts. She talked about the small things. A patient who'd misunderstood something and then understood it. A family who'd misunderstood did. She was genuinely good at what she did. She was suited for it in some deep, structural way. Garrett talked about her career like it was a hobby she'd eventually outgrow. And then, 3 weeks before the engagement party came the piece I hadn't expected. He was on a call with what sounded like a lawyer. I caught it in fragments. I was near the hallway, not eavesdropping deliberately, but not moving away either. I want the wording airtight before she sees it. A pause. No, she doesn't have her own counsel yet. We haven't gotten there. Another pause. The main thing is protecting the Calgary property and the registered accounts. Then, quietly, the line that stopped me. If she decides this isn't what she wants, I need to be in a position where I'm not starting from zero. I walked back to the front desk, answered a phone inquiry about weekend availability, did it on muscle memory. A prenuptial agreement, drafted without Leanne's knowledge, without her having legal counsel. I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand all the nuances of family law in Ontario. But I understood the shape of what I'd heard, and I understood that my daughter had never once mentioned any of it. For a week after that, I questioned myself thoroughly. What Garrett was doing wasn't illegal. Men plan financial futures. People move across the country for careers. Couples sign prenuptial agreements all the time. There's nothing inherently wrong with the document itself. But he hadn't told her. Not the prenup, not the Calgary position, not the plan to have her adapt. He'd made these decisions, large, irreversible decisions, as though she were a variable to manage, rather than a person to consult. I drove across town and met an old friend for breakfast. His name is Bruce, retired OPP, 27 years, mostly fraud investigation. We play cribbage Thursday afternoons in winter. He is the least dramatic person I know, which is exactly why I trusted him with this. He let me talk for 20 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, he poured more coffee and said, "You won't find a smoking gun." I know. Because what he's doing isn't illegal. I know that too. Bruce set his mug down. What you need isn't proof he's a bad man. What you need is for your daughter to hear the full version of what's being planned for her. Clearest sentence I'd heard in a month. I drove home and thought about it for a long time. The problem was that simply telling Leanne wouldn't work. I'd tried once, carefully, asking about Calgary, asking about long-term plans. She'd looked at me with patient exhaustion and said, "Dad, he's good to me." She said it the way you say something to someone you love, but who keeps making the same mistake. I understood. If someone had criticized Ruth before our wedding, I'd have defended her without hesitation. Loyalty doesn't respond well to being argued out of itself. She would have to see it herself. The engagement party was held at the Millbrook Inn. That wasn't my arrangement. Garrett had booked it, told Audrey it was a surprise for his fiancé, paid for the private dining room, ordered a set menu, arranged on flowers, $90 per head for 50 guests. Audrey mentioned it to me and asked if I could manage the evening's front of house. Of course, I said. I did not mention who the groom was. Ruth looked at me across the kitchen table when I told her. "Lloyd, I know. You're sure about this?" "I'm sure Leanne should know what she's walking into." That's not the same thing. She was right. It wasn't. I sat with that for several days. In the meantime, I wrote things down. Not secrets. Nothing obtained through deception. Nothing illegal. Facts. Dates. The Calgary job offer. I confirmed it through a legitimate contact in the federal infrastructure network, someone who still had professional connections in Alberta's consulting sector. The prenup, Leanne had mentioned offhandedly during one of our coffees that her fiancé had asked her to look over some paperwork before the wedding. She'd waved it off as standard. I said nothing, but I noted the date. The gap between what Garrett had said on the phone and what Leanne understood to be true. By themselves, none of it was damning. Together, it told a story. A story about a man who was building a future and had simply not included his partner in the architectural decisions. The evening of the party was a Saturday in late March, cold still. Kingston in March is mostly still winter, but clear. The limestone buildings along King Street held the last of the afternoon light. Inside the private dining room, the inn looked beautiful. Candles, white linen, branches of forced forsythia in tall vases. Someone had done it properly. I worked the front, greeting guests as they arrived. Leanne came in on her fiancé's arm, wearing a dark green dress I hadn't seen before. She looked happy. She looked the way a person looks when they believe they're exactly where they ought to be. She hugged me at the door. In that moment, she was 9 years old again, falling asleep against my shoulder on a long drive home from her grandmother's place in Renfrew. I nearly lost my resolve entirely. Nearly. The evening proceeded. Dinner was served. The room warmed with wine and conversation. Garrett moved through it all with the comfortable authority of someone who'd planned the event and knew precisely where it was heading. He was charming. He touched Leanne's hand at the right moments. He laughed at the right things. He thanked her colleagues from Kingston General by name. I watched. I served water. I checked on the kitchen. Around 8:30, Garrett tapped a glass and the room quieted. He stood at the head of the table, confident and polished, the kind of man who is comfortable being looked at. He thanked everyone for coming. He spoke about finding the right person, about what it meant to commit to building a life together. He thanked Leanne's friends, her nursing colleagues, both families. He looked at me once. Briefly. The way you glance at a piece of furniture you're glad is in the right place. I've been holding on to some good news, he said, and tonight feels like the right moment. Leanne tilted her head, still smiling. I've accepted a senior partner position in Calgary. It's something I've worked toward for a long time. He looked at her warmly. Leanne and I are going to start our next chapter in Alberta. The room responded with a small wave of sound. Surprise, congratulations beginning to form. Then they stopped. Because Leanne wasn't smiling. She was looking at him with an expression I recognized. Not anger. The particular stillness that comes before it. The moment when a person is deciding what they've just understood. What position, she said. Garrett's smile stayed, but something moved behind it. The Calgary offer. We talked about exploring. You accepted? The timing worked out. I was going to. When did you sign? No answer. Her chair shifted back slightly. Not dramatically, just enough. I stood up from near the door. 50 people in a warm room on a cold March night, and the silence was total. I didn't raise my voice. There was no need. Leanne, I said. Before anything else, I think there are some questions worth asking. Garrett turned to look at me, then looked again. I watched it happen, the slow rearrangement of recognition, the reading glasses, the beard, the context, my name on the staff plaque beside the door. He'd walked us 24 times without reading. His face changed. Frank, he caught himself. Lloyd? Yes. The room held very still. Leanne looked between us. I looked only at her. Always her. When did he tell you he'd accepted the Calgary position? She turned to Garrett. He said nothing. When did he tell you he'd already researched Calgary neighborhoods? Silence. When did he show you the prenuptial agreement he had drafted? That one landed differently. Leanne's expression shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not surprise, exactly. Something closer to pieces assembling that she hadn't quite let herself put together before. Garrett stepped forward. This isn't the place. Lloyd, this isn't. She deserves the full picture, I said, quietly, without anger. That's all. I placed several sheets on the table. Nothing stolen. Nothing obtained improperly. Copies of confirmed information, the Calgary job timeline, the prenup document Leanne had mentioned but not reviewed, dated correspondence that showed the sequence of decisions and when they were made. Leanne looked at them for a long time. The room stayed quiet. A few guests looked at their hands. Garrett started talking. Explanations, context, the word surprise used more than once, but his voice had lost its shape. The confidence was gone. Leanne wasn't listening to him. She was reading. Page after page, slowly and carefully, the way nurses read, with the particular precision of someone trained to understand what matters and what doesn't. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. Not with heartbreak. I'd seen my daughter cry with heartbreak. This was different. This was the expression of someone who has just recognized something they'd been working not to recognize. You made these decisions, she said, and then planned to tell me after. Garrett tried once more. I knew you'd be cautious about the move. I wanted everything in place before. You made them for me. The room was completely still. Not with me. She set the pages down flat, for me. He opened his mouth. She shook her head, once, quietly. I've spent 8 years learning how to advocate for people who can't advocate for themselves. Her voice was steady. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life with someone who thinks I need to be managed. She reached for the ring on her left hand, turned it once, slowly, the way a person does when they're saying goodbye to something. Then she placed it on the table in front of him. No speech, no raised voices, no scene. She picked up her water glass, took a slow sip, and turned to speak quietly to the woman sitting beside her. Garrett stood at the head of the table for a moment longer. Then he gathered his jacket from the chair, said something low to a colleague nearby, and left the room. No one called after him. The weeks that followed were not easy. I won't pretend they were. Leanne was in pain. She was embarrassed. Some of her anger came in my direction, and fairly so. I'd held what I knew longer than I should have, and I'd chosen a public moment in a way that hadn't been entirely about her needs. Some of it had been about mine, about my own frustration, my own fear. I owned that when she was ready to hear it. We talked, then didn't talk for a while, then talked again more honestly. Ruth was more patient through all of it than I deserved. By summer, things were different. Not the same as before, but different in the way that growth is always different from what preceded it. Leanne enrolled in a clinical leadership program she'd been putting off for 2 years, something to do with emergency trauma coordination across the region. She found an apartment on the top floor of a limestone Victorian not far from the waterfront. She bought a second-hand kayak and started spending Saturday mornings on the lake before her shifts. One Sunday afternoon, she came for dinner. Pot roast, same as always. After, we sat on the back porch with tea, while the light went long across the yard. She was quiet for a moment, turning her mug in both hands. You know what I keep thinking about? What's that? The whole time, I knew something was off. Something small I couldn't name. She looked out at the yard. I think I just kept talking myself out of naming it. I nodded. That scared me more than anything else, she said. Not him. Me. That I'd gotten that good at not seeing something. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to add. There's something that happens when you love someone, when you've loved them since the moment they were handed to you, and there was nothing in the world that felt more important. You think protection means standing between them and harm. It doesn't, not always. Sometimes it means making sure they can see clearly, and then trusting entirely that they'll know what to do with what they see. The hardest part isn't the moment you step forward. It's the moment you step back. If you've ever stood in that silence, knowing something, not knowing what to do with it, afraid of getting it wrong in either direction, then you understand exactly how long those seconds can feel. Sometimes it's worth all of it anyway. Thanks for listening.